Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Discussing Disability, the series in which I give you my unfiltered perspective on what it's like to live with a profound physical disability in South Africa. As mentioned previously, my particular disability is known as cerebral palsy, or CP for short. And today, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what my experience of education was like in this country. So, in order to get right to the meat of the issue, the main difference between South Africa and the West is that it is far less common here for children with disabilities to be integrated into schools for those who don't have any. The most commonly employed educational model here is that if one is born with a physical or intellectual disability, then they are allocated to schools which are specially equipped to deal with those issues. For the majority of my formative years, this was the kind of school that I attended, although in the 5th grade I was what you might call the guinea pig in a pilot project that a local school wanted to run to see if they could possibly add a section to educate kids in the area with physical disabilities. Unfortunately, it seems that without the specialized training that other teachers receive to do that job, most of them found the experience rather frustrating in hindsight. There are a few major differences between schools for the disabled and schools for normal kids. The first and most obvious one being how they are built. Schools for the disabled are purpose-built to accommodate wheelchairs, which means that in place of staircases and raised levels that people have to step up onto, there are many more ramps and leveled areas which can be accessed by wheel. By contrast, when I had occasion to visit normal schools, both as a child and in my adult life, the fact is that in many cases I was simply unable to access parts of the buildings because many of them are old and therefore not built to accommodate those unable to walk. Aside from their physical layout, schools for the disabled are also quite different on a social level. Firstly, because everyone in attendance has some form of physical or mild intellectual disability, such as ADHD, no one seems out of place, so no one gets looked at sideways or seen with any unusual interest. But, however, when I participated in the pilot project, I was the object of intense interest for my entire class for about a week after I arrived, until they all got bored and moved on to something else. The other noteworthy differences include the fact that, in my experience, teachers at disabled schools seldom, if ever, become frustrated or annoyed when a student struggles to complete a task that they've been given, because they have been trained to understand that, for the most part, the student wants to do what they are told, even if it is difficult for them to achieve it. Disabled schools are also unique in that they usually have specialized therapists as part of the full-time staff, such as physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, and psychologists. Another important thing to consider is that because South Africa is a relatively small country in terms of geographical size, there aren't many schools for the disabled to be found. So what happens is that children with disabilities are often sent great distances to be educated, which means that they are unable to go home at the end of the day like most normal kids would. So, generally speaking, schools for the disabled also offer a hostel facility in which long-distance kids can stay for the full term while they are learning. Although it was never necessary for me to stay in the hostels, both of the schools I attended as a child were a considerable distance away from my home, which had the effect of isolating me from the other kids in my own local community. To conclude, I would like to talk about some of the pros and cons of having been educated in specialized schools. One main benefit is that in a specialized school, you never feel out of place or like some sort of freak, because everyone understands what it's like to deal with some sort of difficulty or frustration. By the same token, though, there is also quite a steep downside to this, because it has the unintended consequence of putting those with disabilities into quite an insulated social bubble. Because what happens is that physically normal people aren't then exposed on a daily, weekly, or even monthly basis to those with disabilities. So we always kind of carry this aura of unusualness or oddity. When I completed high school and moved on to college, it took a solid 6 months before the other students in my class felt comfortable enough to engage in normal social interaction with me. And to this day, because of their limited experience of people with physical disabilities, many grown adults seem compelled to speak to me at half speed or to limit their vocabulary to small words upon our first meeting, because they assume me to be in some way mentally handicapped purely because they can see a visible physical disability. And believe me, while it can be deeply frustrating and annoying to be regularly thought of as mentally retarded, at the same time, I understand that I can't rightly blame the people who assume this, because how would they know any better if they'd never been exposed to someone like me on a regular basis before? If you find value in my content, then please consider supporting me either by buying some Ghostwriter merchandise, supporting me via Patreon, or sending a once-off tip via PayPal. Until next time, folks, farewell.